Changing a country isn't easy, but change is inevitable. And the choices we make today will shape our country for generations to come. That's why we've published our first book from Australia Institute Press. What's the Big Idea offers 32 ideas for a better Australia, from leading thinkers such as Bob Brown, Sally McManus, Dr. Emma Shortis, and Professor Brian Schmidt. The essays are a roadmap and a reminder that the solutions exist. Australia just needs the courage to implement them. Visit australiainstitute.org.au or follow the link in the show notes to order your copy of What's the Big Idea today.
Australians are starting to realise how they've been lied to for so long. They're starting to understand that big gas has been taking the piss the whole time and they want it to stop.
One for Mum, one for Dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared.
The Treasurer knows. I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that explains economics, politics and policy in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute, and Opposition Leader Peter Dutton has announced a major change in coalition policy.
The plan is headlined by an East Coast reservation scheme to force natural gas exporters to increase onshore supply.
Well, there's gas already, obviously, that is being exported, but it's not contracted to do so under the foundation contracts. And that's the point that I'd make. We don't need to rely on new gas wells. There is gas there now.
In flagging his gas reservation policy, Dutton has confirmed what Australia Institute research has long shown. No matter how the gas industry tries to spin it, there simply is no gas shortage in Australia. And it's not just Peter Dutton. It puts the coalition on an unlikely unity ticket with the Greens and One Nation, as well as Senator Jackie Lambie and Senator David Pocock.
Australia doesn't have a gas supply shortage. We have a gas export problem.
Oh, good morning. Hallelujah. The same pitch we've been trying to pitch for the last 10 years I've been up here, Pete, which is have a gas reserve policy. Now, they do it in Western Australia to 15%. I don't understand why we can't do it here.
We've got the courage to say Australian gas should be for Australians.
Right, Australia does not have a shortage of gas. The driving factor behind this crisis that we're seeing at the moment is obviously the war, but also the fact that most of the gas gets exported, often overseas tax-free.
But the gas industry isn't just trying to sell the public a furphy oversupply. It's destroying our climate, and it's not paying anywhere near enough tax or royalties, for that matter, on the gas it extracts and exports. Put simply, big gas is taking the piss. Joining me to discuss this monumental shift in public policy and what the government can do about Australia's gas export problem is Australia Institute Principal Advisor Mark Ogge. G'day, Mark.
G'day, Ebony.
And Rod Campbell, Research Director here at the Institute. G'day, Rod.
Hey, Eb.
So I want to begin with Opposition Leader Peter Dutton, who has announced what looks like a gas reservation policy and basically has said there is no gas shortage problem in Australia. Mark, how big a shift is this in Australian public policy terms?
This is an enormous shift, Ebony, because for years, both the major parties in Australia, in and out of government, and many media commentators who should know better, have been parroting gas industry talking points, saying that Australia has a gas shortage and that the only way to solve that gas shortage is to open up big new projects, when in fact we export 80% of our gas, and the problem is we've got too many exports. So what it does is destroys the myth that there's a gas shortage in Australia, which is the primary justification the gas industry has been giving for getting new projects approved.
Yeah, and Rod, for many years now, the gas industry has really loved to scare not just the public, but policymakers with the idea that there is a supposed gas shortage. And of course, the only way to solve it is to dig up more gas. I mean, is there any truth to this claim whatsoever?
Absolutely none. And I always love pulling out a few screenshots I took in 2014 when apparently if New South Wales didn't frack up Gloucester and frack everything in the northern rivers, then the whole place was going to run out of gas and we were all going to have cold showers all winter. It was nonsense then and it's nonsense now.
And Mark, I mean, Peter Dutton, this is a really big shift. He, previous to now, has really gone along with these gas industry talking points. But I know there's not a lot of detail about many of the other coalition policies, but he's talked about the fact that we are exporting enormous amounts of gas and that part of that is, I think he says, uncontracted. What does that mean? How does that help the Australian domestic gas market?
Yeah, so just a bit of context. So we allow the export of 80% of gas produced in Australia, and these companies use more gas just running their export terminals than Australia uses for electricity or manufacturing.
Can you just repeat that, Mark? Because I'm not sure that people are really aware of that, particularly if we keep hearing about this idea of a shortage. So just the gas used for export is how much?
Yeah, so in Australia, gas is all about exports. So 80% of the gas produced in Australia is exported, and they use more gas just running their export terminals. This is on top of what's exported. They use more gas just running their export terminals than Australians use for electricity or manufacturing. So it's all about exports.
That's massive. And so how much of that gas for export is tied up in long-term contracts and how much is uncontracted and could be diverted to the domestic market?
Well, at the moment, the amount across Australia that is not in long-term contracts is a little bit less, probably about 80% of the amount of gas we use in Australia. So there's a vast amount of uncontracted gas. There's more on the west coast than the east coast. On the east coast, it's about 100 petajoules, and that, for context, that's equivalent to about 20% of the gas we use annually in eastern Australia. So it's a vast amount of gas, and if you diverted all of that to the eastern Australian gas market, that would make an enormous difference.
And Rod, why would it make an enormous difference? What would it do to gas prices, and how have gas exports affected domestic gas prices in recent years?
Yeah, so exporting gas off the east coast of Australia has resulted in Australian wholesale gas prices tripling. So because we've opened our market to the rest of the world. But before we started exporting gas out of Queensland, the start of 2015 or end of 2014, Australia was actually isolated from world gas markets. We couldn't export it and we couldn't import it. End of 2014, start of 2015, we opened these gas terminals that take shiploads of gas off to mainly Japan and Korea. And suddenly that meant gas companies in Australia could either sell to Australians for not very much or sell on to the big money at big Asian gas markets. And of course, they'd rather do that. And that dragged the Australian gas price up too. So it's actually always been exporting gas off the East Coast has pushed up the price for Australians because we're now linked to world prices. And so what they're talking about here is saying if we restricted the amount of gas that's being exported and made sure that it was used in Australia or placed some kind of heavy tax or levy on gas exports and made sure it was used in Australia, then that would naturally push the price down.
There is a lot of gas that's exported that we could turn back into the domestic market.
The gas cartel often tell us that there's a shortage of gas in Australia. That is simply a lie, and it's the basis that they use to make profit.
We can bring down the cost of electricity. We can bring down the costs across the economy otherwise, and that is, I think, transformational for our economy.
And Mark, I mean, we've seen that same tripling of gas prices on the East Coast and the West Coast. And really, we have seen, you know, what a huge impact this has had on the cost of living, for example. And I am curious here about Peter Dutton's idea about how you would enforce this kind of a reservation policy effectively. And he has, as Rod said there, talked about putting some type of tax or levy on gas exports if they're not delivering enough to the domestic market. Why is that a good idea? How would that work?
Well, what they've said so far is that they will put a charge on gas exports that are going to the spot market, as I understand it. And so that means that if you're sending a ship full of Australian gas to the spot market, so I should take a step back.
Yeah, I was going to say, what is the spot market?
Yeah, so when these companies export gas, most of the gas is already under contract to customers overseas. So they have big contracts with, say, a Japanese power station or some kind of some company in Japan or Taiwan or Korea mostly, or China, and that's to supply a certain amount of gas over a certain period of time, and the prices are contracted. So they're generally, because it's over a longer period, it's generally cheaper at a lower price than gas that's on what's called the spot market. So the spot market is where international customers can go and just buy gas they need at any given moment. So the prices are much higher, and that makes it incredibly lucrative if you've got a whole lot of gas that's not contracted and you send it to the global spot market. You can make much more money. And so what these companies are doing is they're sending the gas, rather than supplying gas to Australian customers, they're sending it to the global spot market because it's more profitable, and leaving Australian customers either without gas or leaving the market very, very tight so that the price goes up.
But hey, I don't want to hijack your podcast, but I feel like we need to backtrack a little bit and say that we think Peter Dutton's got it half right here. Eb, you pointed out that there's wide agreement across the Australian Parliament that gas exports are a problem, that, weirdly, you've got the Greens on the same page as Peter Dutton and the Liberals and David Pocock and Senator Lambie, Senator Hanson. I think it's worth emphasising again that all of these people are on the same page regarding gas exports. Gas exports are a problem. Beyond that, there's actually not a lot of agreement. Certainly Senator Hanson doesn't want so much gas being exported because she wants more of it being used in Australia. She certainly wants more fossil fuels being used, not less, whereas the Greens want less fossil fuel use overall, and so do I. So I'm just worried that some listeners and people who aren't really following this might not quite pick up on that point that everyone agrees, except for Labor, that exports are the problem. But beyond that, there's your standard culture war stuff going on between the need to use less fossil fuels by anyone who's interested in the public interest and climate change, and people rooting for more fossil fuels if they are less interested in the future of the planet.
And just so we're clear, Mark, if Australia is trying to decarbonise its economy, there is no room for new gas projects or new coal projects, is there?
No, absolutely not. So the International Energy Agency, the United Nations, scientists from Australia and all over the world, so many different authoritative groups and individuals have pointed out that we don't need any new fossil fuel projects. The ones that are currently running will deplete over time, and then we'll head to zero. So we need to just stop approving big new fossil fuel projects. And the other point is that will actually be a help economically, because gas and now coal are very expensive fuels. Renewables are far cheaper to produce electricity, even when you include the cost of additional transmission and firming power, much cheaper. So if we use renewables, we'll save on our electricity bills. And for heating and our houses and hot water and cooking, gas is really expensive. And if people can electrify their houses, they'll save money every year forever. And similarly with a lot of industries. It's a bit harder for some industries because they've got the big capital costs of retooling and changing over their equipment. But if governments through industry policies enable them to do that, those companies who are able to electrify will save money every year forever. So decarbonising and getting off gas and coal is cheaper than staying on it.
Yeah, is it worth stating loud and clear our position of absolutely we should be restricting gas exports and making sure Australians have access to reasonably priced gas, but at the same time, it's abundantly clear that Australia needs to use less gas and that public policy should be aiming to help Australians use less gas. We should be making sure our electricity system uses less gas. So let's not let anyone be confused about the position of the Australia Institute. We're applauding Peter Dutton's position here that he's acknowledging the problems that excessive gas exports are creating, but all of us need to be using as little gas as possible as soon as possible.
So effectively, Peter Dutton is half right. He's right on gas exports being the problem, but not necessarily on the full suite of the solutions that he's
half right on this topic. There's a whole bunch of others where he struggles to get to 50%. So, he's doing better.
We might make those subjects of future podcast episodes. And Rod, I just want to follow that up with who our gas export customers are, because I know you've done a lot of work with organisations in Japan who we sometimes hear, well, we're going to threaten these countries' energy security unless we send them all of our gas. Is there any truth to those kinds of claims?
No, there's no truth to that at all. There's Japanese government statistics that show that Japan actually on-sells loads and loads of gas. By some measures, Japan actually on-sells to other countries in Asia more gas than Australia sends to Japan. So the idea that we need new gas projects in Australia to keep the lights on in Tokyo, this has been debunked not only by Japanese researchers, but by the Japanese government itself.
Ebony, can I pick up on something that Rod said before? So there is a contradiction that, as Rod said, if Peter Dutton is saying that there's plenty of gas and we don't need new gas projects, and then says he's going to greenlight huge new gas projects, so that's a clear contradiction. But what David Littleproud said the other day is that's really about exports, that most of that gas will go for exports. And, he said exports are important, but that goes to another key thing, like what's Australia getting out of these exports? Why do we have to give them vast amounts of our gas? Because we're at the moment we're allowing them to send enough gas that could supply Australians for 4 years offshore every single year. So what do Australians get out of it? Well, people might be surprised to know that these companies get most of the gas they export for free. Our government doesn't charge royalties. None of them have ever paid petroleum resource rent tax, which is a tax that's been in for 40 years and was specifically designed to cover the oil and gas industry. None of them have ever paid it as of 2023 when Treasury made that statement. And many of them, year after year, don't pay any corporate tax. Like the big gas export projects in Queensland that export all of Eastern Australia's gas, none of them have ever paid corporate tax. If you've paid any tax, income tax before ever, you've paid more tax than these companies have paid in corporate income tax ever on about $140 billion worth of gas they've sold.
I just happen to have the INPEX Tax Transparency Report 2022 open in front of me.
And what does it say, Rod?
They sold $8.5 billion worth of gas. They made $3.8 billion in profit, and they paid income tax paid $0.
And they got all of that gas for free.
All of that was free. Not a cent in royalties for that.
So $8 billion in value of gas, and they paid zero taxes, zero royalties.
Yeah, that's a zero.
I mean, that is just maybe the worst tax policy I've ever heard in my entire life. It's no wonder we can't afford to do things that help people out of the cost of living when, I mean, that should be just a huge resource for Australia and for Australian taxpayers that we are at least getting some value out of.
Australia's the world's third largest fossil fuel exporter, coming in behind Saudi Arabia and Russia. We come third. But even though we export a lot more gas than Qatar collects 20 times more tax on gas than we do. We export more gas than them. They collect 20 times more tax on gas than us.
Rod, how do other countries manage their gas resources?
Not like that. Some other countries choose to charge a royalty on all of their natural resources. They, talking principally about Norway here. That's the best example of world's best practice getting money out of the oil and gas industry. Norway charge royalties. They charge corporate taxes. They have a super profits tax, and they have public stakes in a lot of the companies involved. They have a sovereign wealth fund where a lot of the money goes into. So, yeah, there are other ways that this gets done. Just giving away your resources to multinational corporations, it doesn't have to be this way.
Mark, I want to talk about the climate impacts of Australia's gas, because obviously we're exporting huge amounts of it. It's driving up the cost of living with increased gas prices, but obviously it's also causing the climate change that's driving, insurance premiums up due to extreme weather and those kinds of things. I mean, just how big are the emissions from Australia's gas industry?
Well, currently the emissions from all the gas projects in Australia, including the emissions from when the gas is burnt overseas, which is the main source of emissions. There are some also emissions in Australia from basically when the methane leaks from the gas pipes and wells into the atmosphere. Methane's a very powerful greenhouse gas. So overall, it's about 180 million tonnes of emissions every year. So Australia's total emissions last year, I think, were about 450 million tonnes. So 80 million tonnes just from our gas exports.
Just from gas exports. So it's absolutely massive. It's not small. But the plan is, we're supposed to be reducing our emissions, but the plan really is to expand our emissions, Mark, to massively ramp up gas exports.
Yeah, that's the plan. And they love to conflate domestic emissions, just talk about domestic emissions and not mention the massive emissions from gas exports and coal exports, which are even worse. So governments will typically talk a lot about what they're going to do with renewable energy or some of these measures that are important and will reduce emissions. But the amount of emissions from our gas and coal exports absolutely dwarf any emission savings from government policies. So the really important climate decisions that are being made are decisions to approve these massive new gas export projects like Woodside's big export project in Western Australia.
And Rod, we've heard that they're not paying any company tax. They're not paying us any royalties. When it comes to the gas industry and its contribution to the Australian economy, it's really a leaner, not a lifter. And you've looked into the subsidies that the various Australian governments are giving to the fossil fuel industry overall. How much is Australia in the red when it comes to subsidies, particularly to the gas industry? What kinds of things are the government doing to subsidise the climate catastrophe here?
Yeah, so our recent report put the figure at about $15 billion in 24-25 of subsidies to fossil fuel producers and major users. In terms of the gas industry, I think some of the worst subsidisation goes on at the moment in Darwin and the Northern Territory, where you're seeing the federal government and Northern Territory governments both subsidise infrastructure for the Middle Arm petrochemical hub, where they're hopeful that one day there'll be more gas exports. You see appalling things like the Northern Territory government signing offtake agreements with fracking companies in the Beetaloo Basin. So basically saying to them, hey, if you get this up and running, we commit to buying around $1 billion worth of gas to you. So the money hasn't changed hands yet, but imagine you're starting a pizza shop and the Northern Territory government commits to buying $1 billion worth of pizzas from you, it's a pretty handy thing to be starting up your business with. So there's things like that happening there. And historically, governments have subsidised the export projects off Western Australia. There was a Western Australian Treasury assessment of subsidies and offtake agreements paid to the Northwest Shelf project around $8 billion. So absolutely billions and billions in subsidies have benefited the gas industry and have largely built up the export industry that is doing so little to benefit us now.
And Mark, what could the Australian Parliament be doing to fix this? How do we get more revenue out of the gas industry that's using our gas that we all collectively own?
Well, the first thing I think is that we should be charging royalties on all the gas exported from Australia, not just some of it. That would be a huge amount. The second thing would be to make them pay petroleum resource rent tax. It's an outrage that they have never paid petroleum resource rent tax. The third thing would be to really crack down on these companies not paying corporate tax year after year after year. There's some legitimate reasons, legitimate tax write-offs, but what you've got to remember is that every year they're exporting massive amounts of Australia's gas that we will never get back, and we're not getting anything for it. So we need a system that makes sure that we start getting a really good return from day one. Okay. The next thing we have to do is, or from now on, I should say, we shouldn't be approving any new gas projects because we don't need to, because there's plenty in production already, and gas is a very expensive fuel. It'll decline internationally because there's so many cheaper options. And the other thing we should do is what Peter Dutton is saying he's going to do, which is to divert exports back to Australia so that we don't need new gas projects, and that will bring down gas and electricity prices for Australian businesses and households. So I think they're the key things that we need to do.
And today we announce 7 locations that we have looked at in great detail over a long period of time that can host new nuclear sites.
A mob who'd struggle to assemble an IKEA flat pack are going to start from scratch and be able to develop a nuclear energy industry in Australia.
We want to have a zero emissions future, and let us do it through nuclear energy with gas and CCS and some renewables, but in an environment it can't destroy.
A plan that's always been on the fringes of the serious energy debate in this country has now been put front and centre by Mr Dutton, who is on the fringe of Australian politics.
Rod, I kind of want to ask you about this gas policy seems to have almost entirely replaced the coalition's nuclear policy, which we haven't heard much detail on. It's been pretty quiet about that during the campaign. What the hell happened to their nuclear policy?
Look, Ebony, I'm a bit sick of this. I've been telling you on previous podcasts that I don't want anybody to talk about the nuclear energy thing because I don't think it's a real policy. I think I've always said, and listeners can go back to maybe the last time I was on this podcast, and the fact that they've announced something so ridiculous is either beside the point or entirely the point. The point, in my view, is just to talk about the Liberal Party and their policy positions and how their policy positions are different to Labor, and to get them back in the game. Where I said this is a fake policy being announced by Peter Dutton, which he has absolutely no intention of ever carrying out. Even if he came to government, it'd be impossible to get it through the House of Representatives, the Senate, and past the states, and he would just say, oh, it's all too hard, it's not my fault, and let's move on. So I've been reluctant to talk about nuclear energy at all because it's such a distraction, but now they seem to have found a distraction from their distraction, which I do think is actually worth talking about.
Yeah, well, I think, it's perhaps one of several policies they've ditched in the last couple of weeks because the detail didn't turn out to be too popular or flattering. Mark, we've got an election on at the moment. We've got the opposition leader, the Nationals leader, the Greens leader, Jackie Lambie, David Pocock, Pauline Hanson, pretty much the whole rest of the parliament united in this idea, in confirming basically that there is no gas shortage in Australia, that our problem is gas exports. Are you hopeful at what the next parliament could achieve?
Yeah, look, I think this is absolutely ripped away the facade that we have a gas shortage. It's ripped away this myth that we have a gas shortage because one of the major parties has finally acknowledged what's been obvious for forever, really. And yeah, I think if the Labor Party would just move to acknowledge the obvious truth that we don't have a gas shortage and that the problem is exports, then absolutely, I think we can get on top of this and make sure there's sufficient gas for Australians at a reasonable price, and then start taxing them sufficiently as well. So I think that it's a huge opportunity. This potentially really shakes things up.
And do you think the government will be kind of forced to respond, that is Labor, forced to respond and acknowledge that there is no gas shortage, or do you think they will just keep with this current strategy, which seems to be to kind of just ignore it and hope it goes away?
Well, it's not just ignoring it. It's actually repeating gas industry talking points which are false. It's like continuing to reinforce that there is there is a gas shortage when they know that the problem is gas exports, and using that and allowing the gas industry to use that as a justification for big new gas projects that we don't need. So they're lying to us. It's not really just ignoring it. It's actually telling the Australian public something that's untrue and that they know is untrue. So I think it's high time Labor started being honest with Australians about why our energy prices are high, and tried to explain why we're allowing so much gas to be exported overseas for free, and why they're allowing gas companies to price gouge us for our own gas, and does something about it.
And I just want to throw something out here finally, which is we are kind of seeing the gas industry push back. It knows that it's, people are very angry with it. It knows it's in the sights of politicians. And recently the ABC was reporting that a coalition pollster called Freshwater Strategy was working with an astroturfing pro-gas group. And the summary of this investigative journalism piece says that emails obtained by ABC investigations show that Freshwater Strategy is trying to gather business sector support for a group called Australians for Natural Gas. And a political communications expert pretty much described the activities as textbook astroturfing, just entirely a public relations strategy where vested interests like the gas industry set up artificial groups which are designed to look like, it's a grassroots community organisation, but actually it's all just funded by the gas industry. That seems to be pretty much par for the course for these big gas corporations that have so much money to toss around. But does it point, Mark, also to the idea that they know they're in trouble here? They know actually they've been ripping off Australians for years, and that people are starting to want to do something about it.
You're absolutely right. Australians are starting to realise how they've been lied to for so long. They're starting to realise that these companies get most of the gas for free, have never paid petroleum resource rent tax, are price gouging us for our own gas, and they're outraged. They're starting to understand that big gas has been taking the piss the whole time, and they want it to stop.
Rod, anything else that you think we've missed or we should let people know about?
I just think that Australians for natural gas sounds so much better than foreigners for methane.
We must have tested that with a focus group, you reckon?
I think they've done okay there.
Natural gas always just sounds so much more delightful than any other kind of gas, doesn't it? I can see why they stuck natural in the front there. Thanks so much for joining me today, Mark and Rod.
Thanks for having me back, Ebony, and thanks for not talking about nuclear.
This episode was recorded on Tuesday, the 8th of April, and some things might have changed since recording. You can follow all of the action of the federal election campaign and politics and policy on our new Federal Politics Live blog with Amy Ramikas. You can find it via the links in the show notes or on our website at australiainstitute.org.au. We would love to hear your thoughts on the show today, and you can reach out to us via email at podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au, or you can find us on social media. We're at australiainstitute.org.au on Blue Sky and at the Oz Institute with an AUS on Instagram and Twitter. Our theme music is by Jonathan McVeigh from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Ebony Bennett, your host. Thanks for listening.